by President of the European Council, Michel, followed by President of the European Commission, Ursula Von der Leyen. President.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We have just concluded our EU-China summit. And first, I would like to thank President Xi and Prime Minister Li for hosting us today. The EU is committed to engaging openly with China across a wide range of topics. Several months ago, in June, the 27 EU leaders had a strategic, in-depth discussion on our relationships with China. And we have a clear position. All EU member states are united. This summit was prepared by many high-level dialogues on trade and economy, climate, environment, digital, human rights, and foreign policy issues. And today, we continue to build on this work. The EU and China, we have a shared interest in a stable and constructive relationship. And this must be based on respect for the international rules-based order. We discussed our trade and economic relationship. The EU and China are major economic partners and global powerhouses. We trade over 2 billion euros in goods every day. But the EU has a trade deficit. This is almost 400 billion euros. We need to make our trade and economic relationship more balanced and reciprocal. In the EU, we continue to work towards a real level playing field for our companies. And we expect China to take more concrete action to improve market access and the investment environment for foreign companies. We intend to continue to diversify our supply chains and address our dependencies to be fit for tomorrow's challenges. Let me give you just one example. Graphite is fundamental for the defense industry. China has decided to limit its export of graphite, and this has consequences for our sovereignty and strategic autonomy. This example is showing what's at stake. In the EU, we must better protect our interests. And this does not mean decoupling or turning inwards, because both the EU and China have an interest in effective rules-based trading system with the WTO as its core. Ladies and gentlemen, as we speak, Russia continues to illegally attack Ukraine, and you know that we strongly support the people of Ukraine. This includes Ukraine's future in our European Union. As a permanent member of the UN Security Council, China, in our opinion, has a special responsibility because this Russian war threatens global stability and the world economy. And it also affects the most vulnerable around the world, for instance, by increasing food insecurity and driving up commodity prices. This is not in Europe's interest. This is not in China's interest. This is not in the world's interest. And that's why we strongly encourage China to engage constructively on Ukraine's peace formula. Russia continues to look for ways to access technology to power its war. And once again, we insisted that China should not supply military goods to Russia. And we reiterated how important it is that China help to prevent Russia from circumventing sanctions. We also discussed the tragic war unfolding in the Middle East. Since the first hours, we, the EU, have condemned Hamas' horrific attack on the people of Israel. Israel has the right to defend itself, and it must be done in line with international humanitarian law, including the principle of proportionality. Each civilian life matters. Every effort must be made to protect civilians. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire, and the EU is the largest international aid donor to the Palestinians. And since the start of the war, we have quadrupled our humanitarian aid to over 100 million euros. With China, we agree that getting life-saving aid to the most vulnerable must be a top priority. And together, we support reviving a political process based on the two-state solution. Peace and stability are important everywhere, including here in Asia. And you are concerned about the growing tensions in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. We are opposed to any unilateral attempt to change the status quo by force or coercion. And the EU maintains its One China policy. I trust that China is fully aware of the serious consequences of any escalation in this region. For the European Union, human rights and fundamental freedoms are universal and will never turn a blind eye to human rights cases. And today, we welcome China's resumption of the human rights dialogue as we agreed during my visit. It's a step in the right direction, and today we continue this conversation at the highest level. We also highlighted cases of specific concern, such as the human rights violations in Xinjiang or Tibet, for instance. Ladies and gentlemen, more cooperation is, in our opinion, the only way to tackle the world's most difficult challenges. So, we also discuss areas where we can and where we should work together. We encourage China to be more ambitious in fighting climate change and protecting the environment. We also invited China to join global efforts to triple renewable energy capacity and to double energy efficiency by 2030 and to cut methane emissions. We are also cooperating to improve global health, and this includes work on the international pandemic treaty. China has a role in helping to address the debt burden and in tackling the consequences for vulnerable countries in a sustainable way. Together with the President of the Commission and the High Representative, we are here in China to promote our values, to protect our interests. We have made progress in areas of shared interest and will continue to engage with China based on transparency, predictability, reciprocity. Now it's time to speed up this progress and to make our relationship fairer and more reciprocal, and to work together to tackle some of the world's most pressing challenges. I thank you.
President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good evening to all of you. Today's summit was already my second visit to China this year, and I think this is certainly testimony to the importance of the EU-China relationship. We have a complex relationship with China. We have a complex relationship with China, which deserves frank and open discussions to deepen mutual understanding, and this took place today. This was certainly a summit of choices. It was an opportunity to explain clearly our concerns and our expectations to the Chinese leadership, and of course also to seek progress in key areas of our bilateral relationship. Let me start with trade and investment, the economy. This is particularly necessary when it comes to rebalancing our trade relationship. President Xi explained his view on the current Chinese economy. We trade 2.3 billion euros of goods every single day, and this shows that our trade relationship with China is important. But we explained why we see our trade, that our trade is critically imbalanced. Our trade deficit has reached almost 400 billion euros. And 20 years ago, it was 10 times smaller, 40 billion euros. So it shows the trajectory and the enormous increase of the trade deficit. If you just look at the last 2 years, the trade deficit has doubled. And this is a matter of great concern for a lot of Europeans. Such imbalances are just unsustainable. The root causes are well known, and we discussed them. They range from a lack of market access of European companies to the Chinese market, to preferential treatment of domestic Chinese companies, and overcapacities in the Chinese production. This overcapacity then is spilling over to global markets. And here we see that different regions are already closing their markets to Chinese products. And this, of course, diverts even more overcapacity towards Europe. Politically, European leaders will not be able to tolerate that our industrial base is undermined by unfair competition. We like competition. It makes us better. It lowers prices. It's good for the consumers. But competition needs to be fair. We insist on fair competition within the single market, Therefore, we also insist on fair competition from companies that come to our single market. And I'm glad that we agreed with President Xi that trade should be balanced between the two of us. Of course, we also discussed the approach of de-risk, not decouple. China, by the way, had a long-standing similar approach. China called it self-reliance, and it was partially included in the dual circulatory approach. I want to be very clear here too. Europe does not want to decouple from China. We have seen a decoupling Europe from Russia for good reasons. We do not want a decoupling from China. What we want is de-risking. So de-risking is about managing the risks we see, addressing excessive dependencies through diversification of our supply chains, so strengthen our supply chain, have more robust supply chain from several suppliers, and thus increasing our resilience. And this is not exclusive to China. This is important too. It is about learning the lessons from both the global COVID pandemic and Russia's energy blackmail. There we have felt, first in the pandemic, but then also when Russia started its war, how painful it can be when the single supplier does not deliver anymore. And in light of increased geopolitical frictions, it is important for us to strengthen and diversify our supply chains. We also discussed the topic of the digital in general, and here specifically artificial intelligence. We see both the big opportunities, but also, of course, the big risks of AI. And the challenge is to ensure both safety on one hand, but also open the door for innovation. Market forces alone will not fix it. And voluntary guardrails are certainly good to move quickly. But ultimately, we need binding rules. China has started its global AI governance initiative, and the European Union is right now finalizing its first AI Act to ensure that artificial intelligence complies with our fundamental rights and our values. So even if our governance models are different, we agreed that we should seek to cooperate on artificial intelligence at the global level. Another issue that we discussed was an outcome already of the high-level dialogue we have resumed since the last visit. That is cross-border industrial data flows. As you know, EU businesses have since long expressed concerns about China's rule in this area and the lack of clarity for them. So I very much welcome now China's willingness to establish a mechanism to clarify the rules. This will be a big improvement for European companies. And important is now that we see, after having heard the words, that we see progress on this file. We also discussed the big topic of climate change and cooperation in fighting climate change. As you know, COP28 is ongoing. And I commend China for joining the global methane pledge at the COP28. This is a big step forward. And I think it would be also a strong message by China if it joined the global renewables pledge. As you know, we have proposed to triple global renewable energy by 2030 and to double energy efficiency also by 2030. So I encourage China to join us in this ambition. It's a big success, this pledge, because already in the first week of COP28, 125 countries have joined this global pledge for renewable energy. China is outstanding in deploying renewable energy. It's probably the region where most renewables come online currently, so this is a big success. But on the other hand, and we discussed that open and frankly, we are very worried about the increased deployment of coal power plants in China. We know that one of the most difficult issues in fighting climate change that we face right now is the phase out of fossil fuels. This is the discussion that is ongoing at COP28 in Dubai right now. And of course, we want China to take a very strong position on the question of phasing out unabated fossil fuels by mid-century. Finally, we also discussed the big topic of carbon markets. Actually, the European Union and China have together the biggest emission trading system worldwide. And we have a long-standing cooperation in this area. The European Union started already in 2005 to establish an emission trading system. Now we are moving towards covering 75% of our emissions with a carbon price. And since quite some years, China has joined. We're working closely together, also giving advice on what mistakes to avoid and what positive steps to do forward. Therefore, I'm very happy that we are renewing our Memorandum of Understanding on ETS cooperation. The emission trading system is market-driven, it is well-tested, it has proven its cost efficiency, and it creates revenues that can be reinvested in innovation and reinvested in the developing countries. So all in all, climate change is an area where China and the European Union are cooperating very constructively. Let me turn to Ukraine. Russia's war of aggression is a blatant violation of international law and the UN Charter. And it is a serious threat to European security. And this is why we recalled the need for China to use all its influence on Russia to stop this war of aggression and to engage in Ukraine's peace formula. We also reiterated to refrain from supplying lethal equipment to Russia and to prevent any attempts by Russia to undermine the impact of sanctions. Lastly, we expressed our concern to China about tensions in the region, particularly in the Strait of Taiwan. Heightened instability in the East and South China Seas put at risk global prosperity and regional security. We stand strongly against any kind of unilateral change of the status quo of Taiwan, in particular by the use of force. We acknowledge the One China policy. Regional security will also be increased if differences on the South China Sea are resolved through dialogue and in line with international law. So to conclude, as described, a lot of choices are on the table. And today we had a candid, we had an open discussion, and we agreed to make further progress, specifically in detail, in the high-level dialogues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President. We'll start with questions and answers. We'll start with the IFP. Please introduce yourself and who you're addressing the question to.
Thank you. Hello? Hello?
No.
Hello? Hello? No sound? Hello, thank you. My question is to President Michel. I'm Peter Catterall with AFP. The Director General of the Chinese Foreign Ministry's European Department said today that Russia is a very independent sovereign nation and that President Putin is making his decision based on his own national interest and security. So given statements like this, are you confident after your meetings today that China will do more to stand up against Russia's aggression in Ukraine, including by stopping Chinese firms from circumventing EU sanctions? Thank you.
No, we had today a very good decision on the situation in Ukraine and the war launched by Russia against Ukraine. And we have reiterated our position. We support Ukraine as much as we can, point one. And we have decided to put in place sanctions with some like-minded partners against Russia. And we are doing everything to convince all the countries across the world, including China, not to help Russia to circumvent sanctions. And an important element is related to the peace formula. You know that we succeeded with others to convince China to participate in such in a few meetings at the level of the national security advisors initiated by Ukraine, and yet again today the occasion to sensibilize and to try to convince Russia to participate again in those meetings, because we think that if Russia believes in the multilateral order and the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity, we would like China to be more assertive. We appreciate what they have said on the nuclear threats. This is an important step in the right direction, but we would like China to be clear in supporting the UN Charter and in condemning this war launched by Russia against Ukraine.
We are very clear what sanctions are concerned. We have a sanctions envoy who's traveling the world. And we made the experience that we have a lot of progress in fighting sanctions circumvention when speaking directly to the countries, showing the evidence, and then asking them to act on their behalf. This is highly successful, because often you also see in countries that the companies are Russian-owned, but sitting in different countries. So it's also in the interest of the country itself that they do not have evidence or they do not have companies that circumvent the sanctions, and that after giving them the evidence, they act.
Thank you. Go to Saishin.
Li Wei from Caixin. So for Madam von der Leyen, you mentioned President Xi and both of you agreed the need to balance the economic relationship. Have you managed to discuss how to rebalance? For example, Chinese pay strong attention to this EV subsidy case from EU. Have you reached any common understanding on this? We know next year there will be the European election. If there are no progress made in this economic rebalancing front, will the election make EU-China relations more challenging in the years ahead? Thanks.
So we had an intense discussion on the topic of trade imbalance and the root causes for the trade imbalance, both with President Xi and the Premier. And the first discussion, of course, was on the broader aspect. The discussion with President Xi was on the broader aspect of the root causes for the trade imbalances. With Premier Li, we went in depth into specific topics, well known and well prepared, and it was very good to exchange facts and figures. And we agreed that we have now a list of different elements where we want to deep dive in together in the high-level dialogue. This is important. First of all, on our side, to show the evidence, but secondly, then also to see concrete results on the ground. And this, of course, will determine the future of our relationship. That is important, that we have a frank and open relationship and that we have stable trade relations with each other. And therefore, I think it's important to see now the progress on the ground. One first result was, for example, the clarification on cross-border data I just mentioned, but we also discussed the topic of medical devices, the topic of cosmetics, for example, geographical indications. There we have 175 geographical indications that we have been working on now, that we can now put into practice, very concrete and detailed steps. But this is the way to address the trade imbalances.
I would like to add that we had indeed an in-depth discussion. It was absolutely needed. And I'm convinced that an assessment will be needed in the months to come, and we agreed that this is important to work further together. And I also think that there are today some concrete, interesting deliverables in that field. First, we've decided to enlarge the list of the geographical indication, which is an important topic. We've also identified some sectors where we should try to make more progress. The cosmetics, for instance, the medical devices and equipment, the agricultural product, and there are some other examples. It means that today we had the occasion to express and to explain our arguments, our vision. We are convinced that this question of the imbalances must be addressed. We had the occasion to listen to the arguments of the Chinese side, and we agree that it is important now to go more into the details, to identify what concrete action can be launched in order to rebalance this relationship.
Keith.
New York Times. Did you get into a level of detail of specific Chinese companies that may or may not be helping Russia avoid sanctions? And do you feel that you made enough progress regarding specific companies that may be involved in evading sanctions with Russia that you will want them to impose further sanctions?
We have identified a list of companies which are suspected to play a role in circumventing sanctions, and with the occasion to make clear points in preparation of this summit, but also during the summit. We agree that it's important to go more into the details, and we sincerely hope that today we are heard, and then the appropriate action will be undertaken by China. We will have also the occasion to debrief our member states, because the member states will have to decide what further action can be done in order to make sure that we fight against the attempt to circumvent our sanctions.
Let me reassure you that this is a process that is ongoing already before the summit. So this is a question of permanent dialogue. What the potential circumventions of some, it doesn't have to be Chinese-owned companies, but Chinese-based companies is concerned. And here we had already successes. Not everything was successful, but we had already successes what this dialogue that is ongoing is concerned.
I think we'll go to ZDF.
German TV. Originally, the summit was scheduled for 2 days. Why was it shortened to 1 day?
It was never scheduled for 2 days.
No.
Well, you know, I know where the confusion comes from. It was not clear whether it was going to be the 7th or the 8th. But it was never scheduled longer than 1 day. So it was just a clarification of time.
Go to Bloomberg.
Apologies for not standing up. Colin Murphy from Bloomberg. I wonder if we could go back to the anti-subsidies into the EVs and just maybe talk a little bit more about that. Did it actually come up, and what was the Chinese response to that? For example, did they agree to cooperate with the investigation? And what was their response to your explicit request on this issue? And can you talk a little bit about any other concerns that might have been raised, such as 5G, for example, Chinese companies with 5G in Europe? And did you warn China that you would launch new probes and possibly impose new measures going forward? Thank you.
I'm never a friend of warning. I think it is more effective that you speak to each other, and that on the basis of facts of figures. And therefore, what the EV investigation is concerned, as in any investigation, you know, no comments during the investigation. The investigation is ongoing. Of course, the topic was mentioned without any question. It is in the broader context also to see with the bigger topic that we discussed in general of overcapacity. And this is the second topic of concern, besides the lack of access to the Chinese market. The overcapacity that is fueled by a slowing demand, and the overcapacity leads to spillover effects, of course, on global markets. And global markets partially are shutting down to Chinese products. This has then the effect that the overcapacity is diverted to the European single market. And here was an intense discussion about how to deal with that, because we think that it is in China's interest to deal with the overcapacity, and China has the tools to deal with it. So this is also a topic of rebalancing together the market.
fact, we have three concerns discussed with the Chinese authorities: subsidies, barriers, and overcapacities. And for each of those topics, we went into the detail. We exchanged arguments. We explained why we think that for rebalancing our economic relationship, we need to address those thresholds, and we agreed that it is needed to go more into the details and to see what can be done to guarantee a more balanced relationship.
We'll take the last question, the Irish Times.
Dennis Staunton from the Irish Times. When you raised the issue of Chinese engagement with the Ukrainian peace proposal with President Xi, what did he say in response?
I think it's the responsibility of President Xi to answer the questions. But what we can tell you is this is not the first time. You know, I came here about 1 year ago in December, and then other European leaders came to Beijing to meet with the Chinese authorities. And on the EU side, we speak with one voice. We are absolutely convinced that it must be clear that this war against Ukraine is a violation of the international law, a violation of the UN Charter. And that's why we do not give up, and we try to convince that it's very important to use all possible tools and to use all possible influence to encourage China to stop this war. And I reiterated that there is an easy way to have peace in Ukraine. It's for China just to stop the war and to respect the borders internationally recognized of Ukraine, to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine. This is extremely important, in our opinion, that China participates in the next meetings for this peace formula initiated by Ukraine, and we hope that they will participate in the months to come in the next meetings.
So indeed, it is to President Xi to define his own position. We have been clear since the beginning of the war that how China will position itself vis-à-vis the Russian aggression towards Ukraine, this will define also our relationship EU-China. So it is of utmost importance for us to be very clear that we see this Russian aggression against Ukraine as an existential threat, and that we pay very detailed attention to how China is positioning itself.
Thank you, President. So we'll wrap up here the press conference. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.